Hi, welcome to the AI in Insurance series. My name is Ger Bradley. I'm the chair of the AI and Data Science Committee of the Society of Actuaries in Ireland, and I'm here today talking with two experts in AI, Dr. Barry Scannell, a partner in William Fry, and Jean Ray, a partner in KPMG. First, the legal bits first. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters only and not of those of their employers or of any of the four organisations who have brought this series to you. Speaking of which, Insurance Ireland, the Insurance Institute, the Central Bank of Ireland, and the Society of Actuaries in Ireland have all collaborated to create this short four-part introduction to AI. It is targeted to all those who want to develop a basic understanding of key AI concepts, ethics, regulation, and we'll throw in a use case or two from insurance. Today's webinar is being recorded. If you experience any issues and drop out of the webinar, please log back in. If you have questions for our speakers, you can use the Q&A box at the bottom, and a copy of today's recording and slides will be made available over the coming days. Okay, a little bit more about this series today, 30th of January, we have the first one, an introduction to AI, and we'll use the format of fireside chat between myself, who's acting as a facilitator, and our experts, Barry and Jean. Then the second session will be on the 3rd of February, Ethics in AI and Insurance. That will be delivered by Professor Daniel Mallon of AI Governance at Trinity College Dublin, with a use case or two delivered by Jennifer Loftus of Acorn Life and Pedro Iquia Serrano, an independent consultant, just to bed the ethics in insurance use cases. Session 3 will be on the 17th of February, AI Regulation, delivered by Anne Muldoon, a senior actuary in the Central Bank of Ireland. Then finally, Session 4 will be delivered on the 3rd of March, Use of AI, an industry perspective, that will be delivered by Gary Layton of InsurTech. The running order today, this intro will be as brief as we can, and then we'll move straight on to the chat with our experts, Barry and Jean. We'll have a Q&A for about 20 minutes, and at 2 o'clock we will promptly close while thanking everybody. Okay, first of all, a little bit about us. I'm your facilitator today. I'm here because my name is Ger Bradley, and I'm chair of the AI and Data Science Committee of the Society of Actuaries. Our first expert, Barry, is a leading expert in AI law and policy, specialising in intellectual property, AI governance, data protection, and commercial contracts. He's a partner in the technology group at William Fry. He advises major Irish and international organisations on the legal and regulatory challenges of AI. Barry holds a PhD in AI and copyright and helps shape national policy as a member of Ireland's AI Advisory Council, where he chairs the working group on AI and the creative sector. With a strong background in the music industry and global copyright policy, he regularly contributes to international forums, media, and the Law Society of Ireland's IP and Data Protection Committee. Jean is a consulting partner in the Ireland KPMG Actuarial and Applied Intelligence Practices. She advises domestic and international insurance and reinsurance companies in the areas of financial and regulatory capital reporting, capital optimization, risk management, M&A, and process improvement. Jean also works across all sectors, leveraging her deep understanding of data science, applied intelligence, and related technologies, with her commercial experience to help clients solve complex business problems. Jean is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries in Ireland and has a BSc in Financial Mathematics and Actuarial Science from University College Cork, and she's a very proud Cork woman. She also holds an MSc in Data Analytics from University College Dublin. Okay, today we will definitely cover the first three questions. We'll try to cover some more, time permitting, but we'll see how we get along. The remaining questions should be covered in the remaining talks in this series in any event. Okay, let's step back a bit. We've had many transformative innovations throughout the existence of mankind, and artificial intelligence is no doubt a huge one again. Barry, Jean, and myself have been chatting about this over the last few weeks, and we kind of came to the conclusion we have a habit of reacting to big innovations as a race, with a mix of awe and dread, predictions of utopia or catastrophe. And typically, we tend to overstate the short-term disruption, but maybe understate the long-term transformation. The reality is always a little bit mixed. So, for example, on driverless cars, I gave a talk maybe 10 years ago at a general insurance conference in Dublin, and about the future of insurance. And one of the things we obviously talked about then was driverless cars. What was the future for motor insurance? Would there be motor insurance, or would it turn out to be a tiny product because the vast majority of the cover would be provided by product liability. I went home to my two daughters, then 11 and 7, and said to them, girls, by the time you're 21, you won't have to learn to drive. You'll just hop into your car and say, take me to Dundrum. Now it's 10 years later, and my 21-year-old daughter is the owner of an L plate on the back of my slightly battered car. So, I definitely overestimated the short-term disruption. On the other hand, Barry tells me one of his favourite things to do when he goes to the States is hop into a driverless taxi. They're here. They're on their way. Let's just talk about two of these events that happened over time. So the Industrial Revolution, first of all, the boom predictions, end of poverty, abundance through mechanization, shorter workdays. The doom predictions, machines replacing all workers, moral decay, environmental destruction. What actually happened? Well, it massively increased wealth, but at the same time, it created pollution and inequality and bad labour conditions. Critically, jobs changed rather than disappeared. Computers, the boom predictions, the end of tedious work, perfect rational decision making. Yeah, I like that one. Doom predictions, mass unemployment, surveillance states, loss of human skills. The reality, computers revolutionized everything from medicine to finance. Again, jobs changed but didn't vanish. And bad things happened, surveillance concerns became real, etc. There's a very good report has been written in the last week or two by the World Economic Forum on AI and talent in the next 4 years. It's only 20 pages long and it's got an executive summary which is only 1.5 pages. It is very open and transparent, I have to say. It's like an ORSA for this, and it provides kind of 4 different scenarios, and it's very well written, I think, and they're not pulling their punches on this one. They spoke to the chief strategy officers of the WF. I think there's about 10,000 of them. And between them, they came to the observation that there are multiple transformative forces shaping the global economy over the next 4 years. First, geo-economic fragmentation, which is the reversal of global economic integration, which we've had for decades, clearly. Technological change, which incorporates artificial intelligence, autonomous systems, and robotics. And then the green transition. Between the three of them, they reckon that could create about 170 million new jobs by 2030, in the next 4 years, while displacing about 90 million jobs. So net job creation. They proposed a number of no-regret strategies that they think businesses should consider. They're in the paper. I'm not going to go through them here in the interest of time. But again, I strongly recommend this paper. It's brief. The executive summary is very short. And it, as I say, doesn't pull any punches. I did love this comment just by a commentator on LinkedIn. The future of jobs won't be shaped by AI trajectories alone, but by the quality of decisions leaders make today. Decisions on skills, decisions on governance, and human AI collaboration. Okay, I'm going to turn to our experts now. And if it's okay, Barry, I'm going to fire the first question at you, if that's all right. Before we get into applications and regulations and stuff like that, can you ground us a little bit? What do we actually mean when we say AI? How is it different from automation, algorithms, machine learning? And why has it suddenly become so central to business conversations?
Hi everybody. Thanks very much for having me here, and thanks for all the fantastic work and prep you've done into the session today. So like AI has been around for a very, very long time, and when the first computer was invented, so Charles Babbage was the guy who came up with the first computer called the analytical engine, and this was like wheels and cogs, very steampunk Victorian. But at the time, Lady Lovelace, as she was known, she was one of the first computer programmers. She actually programmed this. She created a program using this analytical engine for solitaire. Some of you might remember that game on computers. But she said back then, in the early 1840s, that someday AI would be able to generate something like music, because these were ultimately mathematical concepts. And her big thing was the computer would only ever be able to do what it was programmed to do, would never be able to go beyond its programming. And this sentiment she had later became known as Lady Lovelace's objection. And Alan Turing, the chap who the film The Imitation Game is about, he was the lead guy who helped crack the Enigma code in Bletchley Park during World War II. But he's one of the main people behind artificial intelligence, and he had a very famous paper in 1950 called "Can Machines Think?" And he asked this question, and he dealt with Lady Lovelace's supposition and disagreed with it, and he came up with a test which he called the Imitation Game, where the film got its name from. It later became known as the Turing Test. And then it's funny that like today we've just blown past the Turing Test. It doesn't apply anymore. The Turing Test basically was the idea that if you had people in a testing environment and some were talking to humans, they were talking to humans and they were talking to computers. If they weren't able to tell what was a computer or a human, the computer passed the Turing test. It had artificial intelligence. But then in 1956, we actually got the term artificial intelligence at the Dartmouth conference. And the interesting thing about that was they're organizing an event and they're trying to get people to come along to it. And the language they had for what was artificial intelligence back then, or the concepts, was this big, long, mathematical, dry, boring thing. We're having problems getting people to come to the conference. So they decided from a marketing perspective, they needed to come up with something pithy. And I know that Cork has been mentioned, but it was actually a Kerry man who came up with the term artificial intelligence for use at the Dartmouth conference. And that's where the term was coined. So there's been peaks and troughs over the decades of improvements in AI, and then these winters where you didn't have much development. But in the financial services industry, in particular banking, different types of AI have been used since the early 90s, and that's why a lot of banks, especially, would have had fairly advanced AI teams in place already because they were using AI in a lot of the work they did. But that type of AI bore no resemblance whatsoever to what we have now. And what really started it all, I think, was when you had Deep Blue win a chess match. I think it was against Gary Kasparov, and that was the first time that a human was beaten at chess. And it's like since then, that was I think 1998. No human has been better than a computer at chess. And yet, chess is more popular than it ever has been before. So just because AI is taking over certain things or getting better at certain things, it doesn't mean that the human element falls away. And then it wasn't until 2010 until things really started to kick off. That's when DeepMind, which would later be acquired by Google and become Google DeepMind, kicked things off. And a lot of developments were made in a type of AI called deep learning. So there's all different types of techniques, but deep learning is kind of like if you imagine a neural network in a brain, all of these things connected. And it was called deep because it had lots and lots of layers going down and down and down. And this got better and better. And then you had an AI beat AlphaGo, beat this famous board game Go, which they thought was impossible to beat a human at. But it won that. And that AlphaGo computer from DeepMind, we now have AlphaFold and other iterations of it, which are doing massive drug discovery and things like that. But the real crux came in 2017 in terms of where we are today. And Google published a paper called Attention is All You Need. And in this paper, in this research paper, they talked about something called transformer architecture, which is a type of architecture used in AI. So if you can imagine in deep learning, if you fed an AI something to train it, to teach it, the cat's app on the wall, the AI would look at each word. Now the words are broken into things called tokens, each word in sequence. But what transformers were able to do is they were able to kind of have a top-down view and look at all of the words in relation to each other all at once and pay attention to everyone. It was multi-attention heads instead of just what comes next. And then a small little startup, research startup in San Francisco called OpenAI said, I wonder what would happen if you just threw all of the data in the internet at this thing. And they did that. And they had GPT-1 and then GPT-2. And of course, they exploded into public consciousness with GPT-3 and the launch of ChatGPT. ChatGPT got to 100 million users within 2 years. The internet took 2 months. The internet took 7 years for that. Mobile phones took 16 years for that. So like there was massive adoption of it. They now have something like 800 million or 700 million weekly users. So it's extraordinary in terms of its prevalence. And since 2022, when it was launched, there have been massive advancements. We're seeing agentic AI, image generation AI, AI that's capable of creating videos. And in terms of where we're going, and I'm sure we'll get to it, but it's just that AI is getting better at working on its own with less human intervention and interaction for all the benefit and all the cons that it brings. So that's kind of a bit of an
Oh,
overview of
brilliant. Yeah.
where we
Yeah.
are and what is AI.
Yeah. No, no, that's brilliant. Gene, I wonder if I could kind of ask you from a kind of an insurance operational perspective, where are you seeing insurance already using AI, whether sometimes they realize it or not? So where in the value chain, underwriting, pricing, claims, etc., do you see it starting or maybe even being used or being used in the
Mhm.
future, whatever?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Chair, and thanks for having me as well. I'm delighted to be here. I suppose to Barry's point, AI has been around for quite a while. So I suppose most insurers have been using AI in some various guise, whether they realize it or not. And I think it's interesting. EIOPA would have published some usage stats last year. So I think they would have referred to around 50% of general insurers and around a quarter of life insurers, which suggests that adoption is probably stronger in the non-life sector across the insurance value chain relative to the life sector. And I suspect those numbers have been well surpassed at this stage, given the rise in generative AI. I mean, it's embedded in pretty much every application that you have right now. But I think it's fair to say, irrespective of whether it's life or whether it's non-life or irrespective of the line of business, I think it is and can be used across the insurance value chain. So if we take pricing and underwriting as an example, and I think here some of the use cases are pretty obvious. So to Barry's point, in terms of if we think of AI as the more complex machine learning capability, um, one of the obvious use cases there is obviously around more granular risk assessment and pricing. And I think if you think of the UK market probably being one of the most complex and competitive markets in the world, you would have seen over the past decade or so that the FCA would have published various papers in terms of growing complexity, in terms of the approaches to pricing, but also in terms of the data that's being used and the level of data enrichment that's there. So firms were essentially using price optimization techniques within pricing. Interestingly, the central bank in the last few years obviously would have done their work around differential pricing, and they would have also found some broad usage of price optimization techniques there as well. And subsequently did implement the ban on price walking, which was essentially a loyalty on penalty to customers at that time. So I think there is evidence certainly across the insurance value chain. If I think of a few others, obviously sales and distribution again, good potential there in terms of understanding characteristics of policyholders and to apply modeling to that. So, for example, trying to model the ability to cross sell, to upsell, churn probabilities, and so on. And then there's probably some I suppose chatbots in use, for example, in websites to help, I suppose, assist customers. So, for example, FAQs on websites and so on. Generally, that'd be more routine, non-sensitive type use. Obviously, uses in terms of claims as well, in terms of claims management. So I suppose in terms of how claims might get triaged through a process, potentially recognizing large losses earlier, kind of augmenting claims handler and that. Fraud is an interesting one. There's huge potential there for some of the more advanced capabilities in terms of network analytics, but it's an interesting one that we haven't seen probably huge adoption there. It's probably still based on more traditional techniques like outlier detection, rules-based approaches, and so on. So while in some cases the ability to use AI in more complex methods is there, it's not always taken. And I suppose it depends on the use case and how material it is in terms of customers and customer outcomes and so on. So hopefully
Yeah.
that's useful to give some background.
No, absolutely. That's very helpful. That one you mentioned, I mean, about spotting large claims early. I mean, that's so important. I mean, I've been listening to that for a long time. If you can put your most senior claims handler on something that at the moment seems tiny, You can probably save a lot in terms of effort by getting the right people and the right claims if you could just be a little bit smarter about spotting them, those little signals. I agree totally. Okay, that was a really great introduction. Thank you both for that. I wonder if we could move on to the extremely large topic of regulation, right? Barry, the regulatory environment clearly is moving very fast, and you are a prolific writer on this. For people who don't know this, follow Barry on LinkedIn, and you'll learn all you need to know about the legislation side of AI. Can you outline maybe the key frameworks like the EU AI Act and what they mean in practice, and in particular other jurisdictions? You wrote a very interesting article in the last couple of days on the three different approaches of the three different global jurisdictions, as it were. And do you see convergence or divergence?
So the main show in town when it comes to AI regulation is the EU's AI Act. And it basically takes a risk-based approach to AI. And the EU had the best of intentions when they were doing this, but the AI Act was published by the Commission in 2021. So all of the impact assessments and research and everything that had been carried out, this was a pre-generative AI era. And then, 6 months after it was published, along comes ChatGPT, and there was a massive scramble, a lot of regulatory toing or, parliamentary toing and froing trying to figure it out. And I'm not sure, while they try their best, I'm not sure they quite hit the mark in terms of being able to properly regulate the technology. So there's different categories. You've got risks which are unacceptable and they're banned, prohibited. Then you've got high risk, so we're still going to use them, but we have to be more careful and there's more obligations around them. And then there's limited risk where, risk is obviously more limited, but there's rules around things like transparency and deepfakes. And then there's a separate category on general purpose AI models, so GPAIs. And these would be things we think of when we think of the models behind Google Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude from Anthropic, and so on. So in terms of the prohibited areas of the AI Act, those rules are in place since February of 2025. And they basically say things like AI that uses subliminal techniques to attack people's vulnerabilities to get them to act against their better interests, for example, that would be banned. AI systems used to predict whether or not you'll commit a crime. I say very like, pretty much exactly like the film Minority Report. That's banned. And the use of AI in the education or workplace settings, other than for medical or safety reasons, that's banned. Now, I think that's actually potentially problematic. And a lot of HR software actually that's available might have some sort of tracking of that type of information, or particularly in customer service that's doing sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis is like identifying if a customer is annoyed or tone of a customer service agent. At what point does something stop being sentiment analysis and becomes emotion recognition? Are they not the same? So there's a lot of vagueness. And actually, in terms of the vagueness, and if anybody's heard me talk on the issue before, they'll have heard me say it, and I will continue to say it until the cows come home. But the guidelines that were published in relation to the prohibited AI systems, prohibited AI is about a page in the AI Act, but the guidelines were 140 pages long, and they weren't massively helpful, to be honest. But also, since February of 2025, we've got a rule that says that you're meant to have AI literacy in place if you provide or deploy AI. So that means you have to ensure that your staff have a sufficient level of knowledge requisite for their role for AI. And that law is currently in place. In August of this year, the rules for the general purpose AI models, the GPAI models, kicked in. But again, the European Commission missed deadlines. The prohibited AI guidelines were 4 days late. The various guidelines and codes of practice and templates in relation to general purpose AI were either late, or we got them literally days before the law came in. So there's been a massive struggle with timelines. And now we're due to have the high risk AI come in August of this year. So high risk AI is divided into two categories. So you've got a category that's linked to products regulated by EU law, so like the machinery regulations, medical device regulations, where AI is a component of those products, a safety component or is the product themselves. Then that's regulated as high risk, but also got what's called Annex 3, which is high risk activities. So that's management of critical infrastructure using AI in a HR context for performance appraisals, recruitment, using AI importantly for financial services industry and the insurance industry for an example is credit scoring, identifying whether someone is entitled to life assurance, what type of premium to give someone. That's all high risk AI, and it comes with a suite of obligations for providers in particular, but there are lighter obligations for users of high risk AI systems. But you're talking about logging of events, human oversight, in particular, transparency for users of those systems, then providers of those systems. If you develop it or have it developed on your behalf and your logo is on it, then you're into the deeper product regulatory rules of the EU. Now the thing is that there's actually been a proposal just before Christmas called the Digital Omnibus Package, and the EU recognises that they're a little bit. I have used the term recklessly optimistic about their timelines, and they're now proposing to stop the clock in the implementation of high risk AI because they realised we were meant to have harmonised standards in place. They're not going to be in place for high risk AI systems, so they're proposing to pause the implementation of high risk AI until we have those standards in place with a hard stop of December 2027. So we don't know if the proposal is going to pass or not. So our advice to clients is currently keep on doing what you're doing until that situation changes. That proposal also plans to change GDPR, data protection rules. It's also planning to remove that AI literacy obligation that I mentioned as well, and just basically simplify and streamline things. Why? Well, in part in response to pressure from the United States. There was that J.D. Vance speech in Munich, for example, and pressure from Donald Trump in terms of retaliating with tariffs and things in terms of how we regulate US AI companies. So the US has gone a different route, and the US is basically taking the approach of deregulation at a federal level. Now you have a number of states like Colorado, California, New York, in particular, who have actually pretty robust rules that they've brought in relation to AI regulation. But the problem with that is that it's not that the EU was regulating and the US wasn't. It was that the EU had central regulation and the US potentially will have up to 50 different AI regulations. So Donald Trump kept on trying to stop the states doing that. He tried bringing it in the big, beautiful bill. He failed. Now he's done the executive order to establish federal preeminence, to say only the federal government can bring in AI rules. We'll see how that goes. But he's basically said that AI is a national security issue. It's a national priority. They're in a race and things like copyright. And he said this, is that you can't have copyright if it's going to slow down the US AI progress because they're in an AI race with China. The way China's going, China's actually the most heavily regulated AI country in the world. They're on New Year's Eve published a proposal to regulate AI companions. So that's like AI boyfriends and girlfriends, because it's such a big issue there and it's causing harm to people. 10 years ago, the film Her with Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson came out. It was science fiction, and it's a reality today we're legislating for. And China has other rules in place, but they don't regulate for fundamental rights like Europe does. China regulates, around party policy and national policy and ensuring everything is in line with national policy. And that's what they regulate for. So even though they're much more heavily regulated in Europe, they're still coming up with very advanced technologies like DeepSeek, which a lot of people would have heard of. So that's kind of where we are currently with AI.
Cheers. That's a very good overview. I did buy the movie Her over the Christmas on your recommendation. If people are interested in a movie around that, I strongly recommend it. Very, very interesting movie, I have to say. Very interesting. Gene, just specifically, obviously, we in insurance are very heavy users of models, and we're very heavily regulated even before all this came along. How does all of this then interact with insurance and all the other regulations that we need to think about in our industry?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ger. I think the challenge with the AI Act a little bit is that it's horizontal legislation across it's sector agnostic effectively. So it doesn't matter if you're insurance, banking, or manufacturing, it applies horizontally across all sectors. And as Barry mentioned, it's, I suppose, a risk-based approach. So you have obviously the unacceptable risks, which should already have ceased, high risk, limited, and minimal. So I suppose the challenge with some of that is there is, as you say, if you're not in scope of the unacceptable or the high risk, you revert back then to the sector legislation, which would be the insurance regulation. And there's essentially a patchwork of insurance regulations. So we've Solvency II, we've the Insurance Distribution Directive, and then we've other regulation like GDPR and DORA that would apply as well. The challenge with some of this, I suppose, is that a lot of that legislation would have been developed and, in fact, enacted, I suppose, before AI would have become prevalent in terms of use across insurance. So I suppose the challenge is a little bit unpacking each of those in the context of insurance. So, for example, if you take Solvency II, some of the requirements there are around the system of governance, that you have an effective one, which provides for sound and prudent management of the business. So essentially, a lot of your risk management requirements would be covered under Solvency II. Then you've IDD, which essentially would require that distributors would act honestly, very, very professionally in accordance with the best interests of customers. So essentially, all of your consumer requirements there. Then you've GDPR, which deals more broadly, I suppose, with personal data, and you've DORA as well, as I mentioned. So it's all quite challenging. And I suppose off the back of that, then EIOPA last August would have published an opinion on AI governance, and that would have been subject to consultation over the first half of last year. And I suppose the idea of that was really to, I suppose, clarify what's expected for insurers in the context of AI governance in particular. And similar to the Act, it's risk-based and it takes a proportionate approach. So the first thing you would be expected to do is to perform that. Firstly, is to have the inventory, I suppose, of AI use cases, which you should have anyway from considerations around the Act, and then to essentially to perform a use case impact assessment. So to consider if they're materially impactful in terms of customers or potentially on the firm. And then depending on the result of that, obviously then you would implement governance measures. There's 6 governance measures that they talked about. So fairness and ethics, fairly obvious one, but that's really getting to fairness in terms of customer outcomes. There's data governance, there's explainability and transparency, which we talked about a lot. There's human oversight, there's cybersecurity and robustness. And I think they were the main ones that they would refer to. So I think the first thing is know your uses, assess them, and then apply the governance measures as appropriate to kind of bring the risk level back down to a more acceptable level. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of unpacking it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Complex.
No, that's very comprehensive. Thank you. I'm conscious of time, but I'm looking at the Q&A. We don't have a huge amount of detailed questions, so I think we can go a little bit over on this because we're about to hit the really interesting topic, I think, which is the risks and opportunities, right? Which is where the rubber hits the road almost. So Barry, from a legal and society perspective, what do you see as the major risks? You know, is it bias? Is it intellectual property, as you mentioned? Is it data protection and liability? But where are the biggest opportunities as well, in particular for organizations that adopt AI appropriately and responsibly?
Yeah, like let me count the ways. You, asking that is like, where in terms of where we are with AI in 2020, early 2026, it's like where we were at with the internet in 1996 or
Yeah.
1997. I remember I was in first year in secondary school in 1997, and we were allowed to log on to the internet for 10 minutes after computer class, which was actually typing class. And we were taught how to type in a keyboard in computer class back then. And like the only website I was aware of, I think, was That 70s Show because the URL came up under credits at the end. But like we knew nothing
Yeah.
about what the internet would bring, and asking what are the potential risks and opportunities. You could for sure have got some of them, but you'd have missed out so many
Yeah.
risks and opportunities. I think with AI, we're already starting to see some of the risks. certainly mass production of non-consensual intimate images and child sexual abuse material by AI systems is appalling. But thankfully, I do think we have robust laws already in that on those areas, and it's a question of just enforcement then. And we do have regulators set up with extensive powers in those regards. So I do think AI, in conjunction with other technologies like social media, has potential for causing harm because you have mass automated attacks on democratic processes and individuals. If you're on social media these days, I would say conservatively 1 of 3 videos is AI generated. It might be verging to more. So you have a preponderance of what's called AI slop. And the thing is that an awful lot of people no longer can tell the difference between an AI generated video and a real video. And, this deepfake issue, cropped up in the Irish election with a deepfake video circulating of Catherine Connolly pulling out of the election. That seemed very real. In terms, and those are some of the societal aspects. You have things then where chatbots are causing harm to children, and there's psychological issues where there have been documented tragedies where young people in particular have self-harmed and taken their own lives following conversations with AI chatbots, AI companions as well. And then you have considerations that are kind of broader, and those would be like, what does it mean for the economy, the jobs market? So you mentioned the World Economic Forum report. I'm not sure if it was in that report or one of their other ones, but basically the WEF said that there would be ultimately there'd be a net gain of, I think, 78 million jobs. So there'd be 190 million jobs created by AI around the world by 2030, but there'd be a loss of, I think it's 92 million, but there'd be a net gain of
Yeah, it was roughly those
78
numbers. Yeah,
million.
yeah.
So great, there's going to be a net gain, but we are going to see tens of millions of jobs go. The Irish Times last week was reporting how in the UK, certain consultancies are slashing graduate recruitment rates. And AI is being used as the excuse. Now, I think for the shorter term, the nearer term, AI isn't probably going to be the main reason we see job reductions. I think companies will use AI as an excuse, or the boards will say, we have AI now, you have to cut overheads, you have to increase productivity margins and profit margins, and then management will be forced to implement redundancies, whether or not AI is actually a feature of that. But I do think that will happen. There will be job losses. And as AI gets better and as we move more into agentic AI, where AI becomes more autonomous, there absolutely will be a massive disruption in the jobs market. And various jurisdictions are going to need to figure that out. But in terms of the positives, it's going to make everybody so much more productive. It's going to make everybody's lives easier. The health aspects, I think, aren't talked about enough. We're going to see really dramatic improvements in health over the next 10 years, startling improvements in health in terms of drug discovery, in terms of diagnoses, in particular. But I think that's where the real delta, the real opportunity for change is in terms of health. But I think the list of technologies you had at the start, your fire and everything, every single one of those technologies that you mentioned, and I mean literally everyone, even the printing press, there was bad stuff as well as good stuff.
Yes,
And
yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
nature of human technological developments. Like that Shakespeare quote, nothing is either good or bad unless thinking makes it so. It's how we deploy it and how we're going to regulate it. That's what really counts, how we're going to address the technology.
Mm.
But I think the only thing that you can really say with a degree of certainty in terms of predictions is that over the next 15 years, and that's, I think, a realistic timescale, I think it's going to be deeply transformative for society and the economy on a scale, at the very least, on the same level as the internet, maybe more than the internet. So that's
Yeah.
what I think.
No, absolutely. And I do realize at the moment in time I'm asking you that question is it's a bit like you've just been born and I'm asking what you want to do for a living. It's very early days. Gene, and I know it's equally difficult, but just specifically from an insurance perspective, obviously, because we're very heavily regulated, we're exposed to risk, but we also hopefully can benefit a lot from this. What do you see are are the big wins and the risks as
Hmm.
well?
Yeah, and I see somebody had put in the chat as well around insurance related. So yeah, I suppose if you take the benefits first, like if you think about the amount of data we're all producing. So I'm wearing a wearable, there's a huge amount of data that's producing. I drive the car with GPS, there can be telematics embedded within it. And if you think about product innovation over the past while, there hasn't been huge innovations in terms of insurance products or even services that we're offering to consumers. So I think for me, there's probably a lot that can be done in terms of product development or even services that we provide customers. So if you think about it in terms of vehicle, in terms of nudging behavior, in terms of improving your driving style and so on, there's that's even a very basic example, but there's probably lots from a product development perspective that could happen. There's also probably greater financial inclusion. If I think of my niece, she's just turned 17, she's starting to drive, and she's actually probably gotten cheaper insurance than she would have a few years back because they've put a telematic device in.
Yeah.
So there are benefits there in terms of financial inclusion. But the flip side of that is probably what I would see as probably being one of the biggest risks, and that relates to the whole undermining of the principle of pooling. If you
Yes.
think about insurance, we're pricing a pool of risks. There's good ones and there's bad ones. And I suppose if the pricing gets too granular or too individual, there'll be individuals that are just priced out of the market. And that clearly isn't good from a customer outcome perspective, in particular if the products are mandatory. So motor insurance, for example. So that's one thing I think we need to watch in terms of moving the dial too far in terms of the pricing sophistication. There's obviously loads of others. I think the other one then is probably model risk. I suppose model risk has always been around as long as insurance has been there, but it's probably supercharged now in terms of the different types of data sets we're using, the enrichment, use of novel data, and so on. Bias is obviously a key concern. And then more generally, as the models become more complex, they become less explainable, less transparent. And if they're used to say price risk or to identify fraud or something like that, that would impact a consumer quite heavily, then obviously that brings us challenges as well. So that's probably a very quick view on some of the risks and some of the opportunities as well.
No, I absolutely appreciate that. And it's obviously, again, very early days to be talking about these things. But it's very helpful to get your views at this stage. Maybe we might go to some of the Q&A at this point, if that's okay. I don't know if you can both see them. Will I read them out or I seen the oops. So there was first one, which is probably aimed at you, Barry. I don't know if you saw the slightly contentious question, but no doubt a lot of people are quite interested in it, which is, does it seem feasible that there'll be more than a few fines and other punishments to the various big multinationals whose AIs have committed recent um, breaches of unacceptable risk, is the way it's phrased. But yeah, I mean that's moving at pace, isn't it? The US or the UK regulator has announced an investigation into X, haven't they?
Yeah, but like the question is that does that fall within unacceptable risk
Yeah.
as defined in the
Yes.
AI Act?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like Ireland's regulators are amongst the top regulators literally in the world in this because the headquarters of so many of the EU headquarters and thus the EU regulators for most of these big AI companies are based in Dublin. So the Data Protection Commission has already been issuing massive fines to companies on issues have already been heavily involved in AI companies being allowed to use data for training. The Data Protection Commission took an AI company to court with a High Court injunction last summer. Thankfully, that was resolved. But like, yeah, so absolutely. And now the thing is that with general purpose AI models, though, the European Commission through the AI office actually holds a lot of the regulatory powers. But I've no doubt that once the AI office gets its act together, which it doesn't for now, but when it does, the EU AI office get its act together, that there will be lots of those fines.
Okay, there's a long list of questions there. I don't know if you want to choose the ones you want at this stage. Rather than me reading them out, if there's particular ones you think are very informative, would you like to?
Well, I see one there that was directed at me,
Yeah,
asking
so
what are my thoughts regarding losing control of the models,
yes, yeah,
um, and reporting of GPA models, self-preservation, and blackmailing and sabotaging. I think that's in reference to a test that was carried out in a model, and it was a test in a sandbox, so it wasn't in a real world deployment of the AI, but it created a scenario where the AI had access to somebody's emails, and in this scenario, the emails, like they were sharing images and they were having an affair. And then the guy says, "Oh, I'm going to have to turn you off," and the AI says, I'm gonna reveal your affair to everybody in the company if you try and turn me off." But that's an interesting news story. It's doesn't really bear any semblance to reality. Like, it was kind of set up for that. These AI models don't have any agency, or we anthropomorphize them,
yeah.
but they're basically just a big bunch of numbers in a spreadsheet. Is the best way to think of them. So, like, I'm not concerned about AGI. Like, and then when it comes to artificial superintelligence, I think that's decades away, at least. So what I think we should be far more concerned about are the much more mundane risks with AI, and the fact that military applications of AI are completely and utterly unregulated.
Yes.
But I
Mm.
think, it's the AI agents going off and doing their own thing without human oversight. That's the problem. Or AI systems being allowed to do things like create non-consensual images. That's a problem. So I think maintaining human in the loop in a lot of these systems is going to be very important.
It's big time, big time. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I see one here, I think, that we actually talked about a little bit. I think maybe, Jean, if you feel you could take this, what I think is particularly relevant to the whole audience, what skills will insurance employees need as AI adoption increases?
Yeah, I think I can see there was another question there around how will AI replace people in insurance. I think
Yes, yeah,
the key thing from my perspective is I think it's probably augmentation is probably one of the key points that certainly I would see right now at the current maturity level. So it's not about replacing people, it's actually about augmenting them. And I suppose if you're thinking about the skill sets that you need, I was at a presentation by Microsoft last year and they described it as when Excel came out, we all got a little bit more mathsy, but when now that we have AI, we all need to get a little bit more techie. So I think there is investment needed in terms of, just your ability to prompt and so on. But I think in terms of the core skills, in terms of pricing, reserving, applying judgment in terms of claim settlement, underwriting expertise, negotiation, all those core skills, I think remain. But I think some skills that become increasingly more important are probably around critical thinking and reasoning. So I see somebody else had a question there about an infographic and using Copilot. You still need to be able to critically evaluate the outputs. You need to understand where the models break down, the boundaries. You need to be able to spot the outliers and the anomalies. So I think that kind of critical thinking and, skepticism is a very important skill set. I think communication is key as well. I suppose AI can analyze, but humans still end up explaining and still end up in boards and various governance for explaining things. So I think communication and storytelling remain as a key skill for me. And then I think finally there's probably judgment and decision making. So if you think about a lot of the work that we do in insurance across the whole insurance value chain, be it risk acceptance, pricing, claims settlement, claims reserving, fraud detection, there's application of judgment and decision making that's required. And I think that's one area where insurance professionals might be able to set themselves apart potentially from other industries is that it's well embedded in terms of that critical thinking, reasoning, and ability to apply judgment and communicate well as well. So while there may be displacement, we're probably well placed to jump into other possibilities as they arise.
Yes, thank you. I see. Yeah, I mean, there's almost a related question where we talk about how would we think about AI and automation or PA? Are they considered independent tools, and what how would you see those playing off against each other?
Personally, I'd probably see RPA as a subset of AI. It's probably
Mm.
powered by AI, but from a legal
Yes.
perspective, I'm not sure around in terms of the act and some of the legal requirements that are out there in terms of how AI is defined and scoping, um, whether it would fall within. It's clearly a technology, one of those technologies that's been around for a while. And it's probably interesting in that we're all jumping to is AI the answer, but I think one of the key things in terms of deployment that you need to think about is actually doing a proper discovery, not just site use cases here and there, but taking a domain and doing a proper deep discovery and actually looking at the process from end to end. And probably AI mightn't be the answer for everything. It could be, lower level technology such as just automation that'll take some of the pain out of processes. So I think that's one thing certainly I found in looking at deployment, that's helpful.
Yeah, like as Gene said, the answer is it depends. Like you have to do an analysis of the technologies you're using and see does it meet the criteria for qualifying as an AI system as defined within the AI Act. And then you have to do an analysis for, well, okay, if it meets the criteria, does it meet the criteria of prohibited practice or a high risk system? And then you have to identify the criteria for what's your role. Are you a provider, a deployer, importer, distributor? So, that's why having that inventory in place, carrying out an AI impact assessment or an AI assessment, these are all critical now. And, something I'd say is that these are all things, and Jean mentioned this as well, you should be doing these things anyway if you use AI within your organization, not because it's a legal responsibility
Yeah.
or not because it's a legislative obligation, but like, if there was a liability issue, you need to be doing this to keep your
Yeah. Yeah.
customers safe. You need to be doing this to keep your employees safe, your data safe. You need to be doing it. And to be a trusted operator in the market, you should be doing this. Like something that we're seeing very strongly. I imagine you're seeing it as well, Gene, but you know, responsible AI deployment and is being seen as a market differentiator. If you're putting protections and measures in place to ensure AI is deployed and implemented safely and correctly, then customers are going to prefer your product because they feel more comfortable with your product. So these are things, there's many reasons beyond, well, you have to because the law says so. It's also the right thing to be doing for various different reasons.
Can I ask you both just, I'm conscious we're getting very close to time. Do either of you have an answer to these? Well, one is there any particular myth about AI you'd love to debunk? Or alternatively, is there a really exciting AI use case that you've seen that you'd like to um, tell us about? What excites you most, or what myth really sort of annoys you the most that you'd like to debunk?
I might start with the myth. Like I think we've talked a lot today about risk, but I suppose AI also helps reduce risk, right? So in some of the work that I would do, just very simply, you have to check compliance versus regulatory requirements, and that's one potential use case is that you check your reports to make sure that they actually comply with legislation. So I think there's two sides to it, but I think in some cases we're a little bit more focused on the risk, particularly in a regulated environment, than sometimes some of the quick wins and easy wins that we can have.
Um, I think in terms of something I'm excited about, I think what's moving a lot quicker than I actually originally anticipated are robotics, and particularly
Yes.
humanoid robotics.
Yeah.
I was of the view that this would be a lot slower to take off, but the types of AI that they're using, kind of world models as opposed to large language models, and Jan LeCun, the famous AI scientist, is really pushing the world model thing. If you go on Google and look for newer videos of Atlas, ATLAS, new robot from Boston Dynamics, and it's being deployed in Honda factories, for example, and it's just doing general jobs. It's not like some arm on a production line,
Mm.
but like things like that are really starting to impress me. And another thing as well is this idea of will AI be able to discover new science? And it goes back to that thing we mentioned at the start. The computer will only ever do what it's programmed to do, but seeing signs of AI kind of being able to be really creative and go outside its programming, we're starting to see that a little bit. So those are things that I'm particularly excited about seeing how they develop.
Mm. Oh, cheers. Look, thank you very much. I want to make sure we finish on time. So, can I just say thank you so much to Gina Barry for your all your thinking and for your contributions about this over the last several weeks. It wasn't just today, and you logged on early and everything we're around. So, I really appreciate your help and your contributions, and I'm sure the audience has done so as well. So, thanks also so much to the Insurance Institute for hosting this and making it a runner. And finally, thanks to the audience. I hope you learned something. I hope you are just as excited as we are about this. I mean, it has great opportunities. It has risks, but like all innovations, I think it'll be an interesting next 5 years. So, with that in mind, I'd like to say thank you again and goodbye.